we kind of were having a conversation about it, and we're just like, there must be a better solution for this. And that's how Tally Market came about. It was kind of that problem of there must be more flexibility available and different ways of doing this.
Hello and welcome to the Founded and Grounded podcast. I'm Laura Rawlings and hosting alongside Ollie Collard, our business startup coach. Ollie, how are you doing this week?
I'm fantastic, thank you, Laura. Yeah, very in the spirit of the new year that we're in, 2023.
What, you mean you've got all of your resolutions done, your business, your goals for 2023 sorted?
I've got a top three. Yeah, I got top three, Laura.
I love that you do that. And do you cover the different aspects of your life? So like a business one, a personal one, and whatever the third one might be?
Yeah, one's related to fitness and one's related to business and another to family. So yeah, I think it kind of fits into those different categories quite nicely.
Okay, are you going to share these? Can I coax these out? Because you know you're more likely to do them when you've shared them. Share one of them.
So one of them is actually related to the podcast. So I want to take us into the top 10 in the UK entrepreneurship category. We've reached number 21 before, but yeah, definitely want to get us into the top 10. So that's a goal for the year, Laura.
Love it. We've got to start as we mean to go on. And I think it is so important having these goals and writing them down, because then you actually start to think, how am I going to get there? And then you've told someone and they're going to ask you about it next time. So we will be continuing this conversation. I'm with you on the fitness ones. I always have a fitness one in mind and hit it to varying degrees. But as long as I keep doing something, my line is just keep going with some movement, not sitting down all day. Then
yeah, and I think that's the thing, isn't it? It's doing those small things every day and being consistent, and obviously that compounds over time, rather than having these unrealistic goals that you're going to be doing, 100 press ups and sit ups a day, or running 10 miles a day. It's just not going to happen, is it? So I think it's better to set smaller achievable goals that compound over time.
Yep. Okie-co. Well, look, let's jump straight in then with our guest, who is fabulous and very much connected to this podcast as well. So tell us who we're going to be hearing from in today's show.
So I spoke to Laura, who is one of the two co-founders from a company called Tally Market, who are our wonderful sponsors for season 4 of the podcast. They're an online marketplace for booking meeting rooms and workspaces throughout the UK.
Well, let's, at this point, go straight to hear from Laura now. She's going to explain this a little bit more about what Tally Market is and what it is that she does.
So Tally Market is a marketplace for workspace. So we make it super easy for companies and individuals to find on-demand workspace. So that could be a hot desk, it could be a meeting room, it could be an office for the day, or it could be an event space. But we also now do full-time offices. So we kind of focus on fully serviced offices. So that could be your WeWork or other brand, but those flexible service leases, which you might get for kind of like 1 to 5 years.
Amazing. And I know you guys sort of started sort of mid-pandemic, didn't you? So how did it kind of all come about?
So it's changed a lot. When me and Jules first had the idea for the company, we were both working at startups ourselves, and we had very different frustrations actually. So my background is in finance, and offices are normally the second biggest cost other than people for a business, especially startups, and being trapped in this lease and paying tens of thousands of pounds for an office that we just weren't using was really frustrating when the company was going through a roller coaster period and having to let staff go. It just felt really unfair. So I was frustrated from that perspective. Jules was actually the opposite. So her company had given up their office, and she hated working from home. So was kind of camping out in coffee shops around London and was really annoyed with that. So we kind of were having a conversation about it, and we're just like, there must be a better solution for this. And that's how Tally Market came about. It was kind of that problem of there must be more flexibility available and different ways of doing this.
Amazing. And I'm kind of really interested in co-founder relationships and, having the trust in one another, but also the kind of complementary skills to launch and run a business together. So I was doing some very basic detective work, and I see that you both went to the University of Bristol. And I know, Laura, your background, as you say, is in finance, and Jules came from more of a kind of analyst position with a focus on sales and marketing. So really interested about, kind of what preceded the foundation of the relationship to starting Tally Market.
Well, right back at the beginning, me and Jules met at university. We were actually in the same corridor in halls, kind of inseparable ever since, which I think some people now, when they meet us, find quite weird because we're very different. I'm quite quiet and reserved, and networking events my worst nightmare, whereas Jules is, loud and, do you know what I mean, super friendly. So we're very, very different, but I think that's really worked well at Tally because we have completely different skill sets and we look at things completely differently. So yeah, Jules kind of leads on the sales and marketing side and kind of the go-to-market, and that's her background. And I do everything kind of like admin-y, boring, finance, HR, all of that other stuff in the background. But I think from a strategy perspective, it's also been really, really interesting because we'll be talking about things and Jules will have a completely different view of it to me. But when we kind of come together and work those ideas out, we normally do come to the same answer, but it is good to have a very different perspective, I think. I'm risk averse. She's, big ideas.
I think that's really important, I guess, for other startups listening who've got maybe co-founders within them. It's a really interesting dynamic, isn't it? Because as you say, you're challenging each other and maybe coming from slightly different sides of the fence, but then ultimately you're actually agreeing on a final decision and you value each other's input. And importantly, in terms of like a division of labour, like you've got clear focuses. And I think sometimes when I hear of startups, getting divorced and ending in disaster, it often is because they're too similar, and sometimes there's not a clear crossover in terms of the co-founder relationship.
Yeah, I mean, I could not do what she does and she could not do what I do. So I think that works really well. And I think it makes us really appreciate each other because, if someone is off for the day and they have to cover the other person, we're so grateful and the other person comes back. So yeah, I think it is good because we have different views, but it's also good because we really appreciate what the other person does.
Amazing, Laura. And how did it go from obviously being great friends and having this amazing bond where you're inseparable and spending obviously a lot of time together? When did it go to the point where you thought that you really trust each other and you could maybe do something bigger together? When did that come about?
I would say me and Jules have had ideas for startups ever since we've known each other. And we never had an idea that we thought was good enough. So Jules is the type of person that if you have an idea and she thinks it's good, she will go and start talking to people immediately. She'll have interviewed 20 people by the end of the day. So you quite quickly learn to get rid of ideas quite quickly, because when you start talking to people or you build your, MVP website, nobody goes on it. Whereas with Tally Market, when we started talking to people, everyone said it was a good idea. And there's the mum test or whatever. So we built like a really, really basic website. We built it on Squarespace ourselves. And people were trying to use it. It didn't functionally work. So the reality was someone would make a booking and we would just be calling up the place like manually to do it. But it did show that people were willing to use it. And actually the fact that they were willing to use this awful website kind of showed that there was real intent as well. So yeah, I think we've had lots of ideas, but this was the only one that really stuck.
I'm going to have to ask you off air about some of those other business ideas that you had, Laura. But yeah, no, really interesting point about the validation there and what you guys were doing. Because I think sometimes founders can be quite apprehensive or a bit scared to kind of talk about their business idea and actually get some feedback on it. And then if they do, they kind of build a kind of, all singing and dancing, bells and whistles, MVP, where in fact actually what you need is a rudimentary product to actually test demand. And that sounds exactly what you guys did in terms of those early days. what sort of numbers are you talking about in terms of sort of users when you were doing the kind of manual process?
So it's a good question. I think we had about 300 users registered, but about 5 companies. And what we actually found via that process was that it worked much better for B2B rather than B2C. Because we actually found when we spoke to people, they expected their company to pay for their workspace, all of that type of thing. There were lots of little things that came out of it that really did inform kind of the end product. So the end product, if you set up as a company, you can add all of your employees, you can request locations where your employees are if we don't have them. And you can set spending rules and you can set where they go and all of that type of thing. You can invite guests to booking. So it's all very set up for B2B. And I think a lot of that was, we found that when people were booking workspace, it was either just to get out of the house or it was to meet up with other people. So then meeting up with other people functionality became super important.
Amazing. And so obviously in terms of, you were talking about the initial problem about being tied into long leases. Obviously that's a pain point that you're solving there. But also there you're talking about, getting out of the house, particularly during COVID where everybody was isolating, and actually meeting up with people and kind of, I guess, in very simple terms, maybe reducing kind of loneliness in terms of the workplace and the world of startups. So what are the kind of fundamental problems that you guys are solving?
I think it depends a bit on the companies. So a lot of the companies we work with now, I think if you're about 15 people, you typically, if you're a startup, will avoid getting an office if you can. And there's just because it's so expensive. So there are a lot of remote companies, but if you employ junior people who don't have nice bedrooms, they're in central London, they do want somewhere to go. So it's providing something for those people. And it was interesting when we interviewed people, it was so clearly, the young that were really suffering from COVID. People who had families and children, they like working from home because they can be close to the things that they want to do. Whereas I think if you're a young person and you're trying to learn and work, you want to be around other people. So giving companies the flexibility to actually look after both sides of their workforce was super important. And that's evolved a lot. So when we first started, all of our bookings were for places near home. And within 6 months, all of our bookings were in the center of cities with people meeting up. So the product kind of evolved as people's behavior changed. And then, lots of our companies were coming to us saying, you know what, we're going to get an office. And so we started helping them find offices as well. So it has kind of evolved as the way people work has changed. And I'm sure it will continue to change.
Excellent. And in terms of obviously businesses having to react and stay nimble to changing customer demands and preferences and the global economy, what advice would you have for sort of founders listening about how to adapt and adjust your business model accordingly?
For workspace or more generally?
Just being open to sort of change, really. How do you build a culture of being able to stay nimble and reacting to external circumstances?
I think it's important to not become so committed to something that you can't change it. I think there's so many easy ways to test things that you can normally test something without building something really complicated. I guess similar to what you were saying earlier about, when someone starts a company and they're like, I need to produce this amazing website with all the bells and whistles. I think with most things, you can test it out in a really fake way. And that can be as simple as, putting a button on the website, and if someone clicks it, you manually go and sort everything out, and you're just kind of on call for a week. But you see if people press that button, you see if they actually mean to press that button, and then you bother to go and build it. So I think there is normally so many ways of testing things. And I actually think our development team are really good at this. So they will say, it will take this long. How can we test it without doing it? And they'll always push back on things because I think it's so easy to have one conversation with a company and think, oh God, we've got to build this. Everyone wants it. And the reality is you can build it and no one will use it. And development time is really expensive. And it's also at the loss of something really valuable you could have built. So you need to test things to make sure you're making the right decision. So I think in terms of being nimble, it's trying to see the least work you can do to achieve something. And then if that thing you decide is important, then go and actually commit to it. But yeah, we try and test things simply at Tally, and let them fail.
Love it. Love it, Laura. And I'm sure with your background in finance, you've got a kind of clear steer on data sets and numbers and actually building an evidence base for the new solution as well, which is great. And moving on slightly, what kind of makes Tally Market different from maybe other providers out there? What's kind of your USP?
I think we view it as transparency. So we try and provide as much information to our customers on exactly what they're getting. And that's whatever workspace that they're using. So whether that's a desk or whether that's a full-time office. I think the other thing is customer service. So, I mean, so far, fingers crossed, our NPS has always been amazing. And I think all of our team go so out of the way to make sure that customers have the best experience with us. And I think that is reflected in kind of how our customers feel about us and our churn and all of that type of thing. So yeah, I think we really try and make the best experience. And I think because we are learning, speaking to customers and understanding what was good and what was bad and trying to, do these little experiments based on the things that they say, is making it much easier to provide really good advice to customers as well.
A word about our sponsors. As a founder, cybersecurity isn't top of your priorities. Yet Alliance has identified cyber threats as one of the top 3 risks facing business globally. This is where Nova Blue comes in. Its founder, Steve Mason, was technical director with GCHQ. He was in charge of keeping the nation safe from cyber threats. He set up Nova Blue to help keep businesses safe. Nova Blue are offering Founded and Grounded listeners a free cybersecurity health check. Simply go to nova-blue.co.uk/podcast offer. Tally Market make it easy for businesses to find and instantly book flexible workspaces. Through their simple platform, you get access to thousands of desks, meeting rooms and private offices at the best co-working spaces in the UK and beyond. It's free to sign up to, and Tally Market are also offering 20 free tokens, the equivalent of 5-day passes, when you register and buy 100 tokens. Visit tallymarket.co.uk/F&G for more information. Ollie, where shall we start from this conversation? How about we go for the co-founder relationships, which I know we're both really interested in, that sort of dynamic, how you find the person that you're going to work with. I mean, lucky them, bumping into each other at university and just kind of hitting it off. And here they are with their own business together.
Yeah, and I think that is quite fortuitous in terms of meeting a co-founder because they've got a history, they've got similar friendship groups, they've got a shared experience of going to university together, so they've got a real solid foundation of a relationship there, and ultimately they trust one another. And I think that is really key when you're going into business with somebody, is the having that implicit trust, because there's going to be tough decisions, you're going to challenge each other, you're going to get pulled in different directions. So if you respect and trust one another, that really is a solid foundation for a co-founder relationship.
Yeah, it sounds like it really emerged from an equal footing, knowing each other for that length of time, knowing that they both wanted to do a business together, but they just needed to come up with the right kind of idea. As well as the trust that they have, what also struck me was the massive appreciation. We heard from Laura, but I'm sure it works both ways as well, but huge appreciation and respect for the different skill set that each of them brings to the company. I mean, it makes sense, but it was actually lovely to hear that, wasn't it?
It really was, and I think if you want to go into business with a co-founder, I think this is an excellent example of two amazing women who have got really differing skills and are both experts at what they do, and there's a clear division of labour there in terms of what each other are good at, and what each other's superpowers are, and the respect, as you say, between one another really comes across. And I think that's why they're doing really well, is because of this really amazing dynamic between the two of them.
Yeah, it felt like they both need to be there to make the business work. I think sometimes, if you're friends and then you go into business together, what happens if there is some discord or disharmony, or one person wants to drive at a faster pace than the other one, or it's not quite an equal footing, it feels more like one person's idea. So it could be really tricky, couldn't it? But it was just so refreshing to hear them. I wonder, do you have any other advice about finding a good co-founder? How do you, apart from thinking, can I actually trust this person, and do we bring different skills to the table? Is there anything else that you should be thinking of when you're trying to pick a good co-founder or find one?
I think obviously having a clear understanding of each other's values is really important. So obviously your personal values are going to really sort of drive the company values, and obviously if you've got differing values, then there's going to be some conflict there, and that's going to not enable you to build the right culture at the company because you've got differing, conflicting values. So I think first and foremost, having the same values is fundamental. I also think that you should be very clear on each other's sort of stage of life. So if you're at very differing stages, let's say one person's just coming out of university, somebody else is just perhaps starting a family, then you're going to have very different sort of drivers and motivators. One person might be trying to obviously grow a young family, one person might be potentially just trying to get on the housing ladder, or do you see what I mean? So I think you've got to be clear on what your personal ambitions are in the short to medium term as well. Otherwise there's going to be some conflicts along the way.
A bit of kindness towards each other, and what other things are going on in life, they actually do make a difference. It's not all what fits typically in what would have been the 9-to-5 bit. Another theme that I felt ran through the conversation, not just in this part, and I think this really appeals to me, but talking about what ideas work and kind of fathoming that out, and basically just getting started by trying with the minimum that you need, the minimum viable product, the MVP, in case anyone was wondering, is what you talked about. So what do you need just to get this off the ground? And I feel this is such an important lesson. It seems obvious, but yet it's something that many of our founders share. So I think it is worth highlighting again, don't you?
I think it is, Laura, and I think they talked about some of the ideas that didn't come to market. So obviously they did some research at those and evaluated whether they were viable propositions, and obviously decided that they weren't, and they shelved them, and obviously Tally Market came to fruition. But I think the key thing that they did is actually going out, finding out what their customers' problems were, and building a solution that was viable, and obviously doing that manually. So they weren't building a all singing, all dancing platform straight away. They were doing this manual process of actually people were registering interest, and then they were calling up the various workspaces
behind
and
the
doing
scenes
it all
of the website.
Exactly. So I think that proves that the model works, and they haven't invested a huge amount of time or money in it. And I think that's really important. I think if you're going out there and listening to your customers' issues or problems, what you'll probably find is that there's probably 3 or 4 overriding themes, and that's ultimately what you want to build the business on. So I think if you're going out there listening and building the solution in the right way, then you're going to build a viable business. Whereas if you're just conjuring up this idea in your head and building it and spending loads of money and time developing it and then just getting it out there into the marketplace, it's probably going to fall flat on its face because you haven't had that customer insight or that customer discovery.
Very much so. It's more of a co-construction, and we'll hear that as we move along into the next chapter. But I think depending on your personality type, it can be a real stumbling block. You can see what other people are doing and think, well, it needs to look like this. I need this. I need the I need the website, I need, those, business cards, or I need the app, whatever it is. And actually there are many more steps before that can also just help you make sure you get it absolutely spot on. Let's move on to the challenges, actually, shall we? Because this does tie up with what you were saying about listening to what customers actually want and then evolving your business so that it really does suit them. Because Laura's going to talk about this now. We like hearing about the success, but we know that we also learn a lot when we hear the warts and all and when things don't quite go to plan. So let's listen to Laura talking about one of her favourite failures.
I think the biggest failure, and in some ways I'm quite still sad about it, is when we actually started Tally Market off. We were much more of the mindset that, it was when hospitality was doing really badly, and we thought, people can work close to home in these cafes and all of these other things, and it just didn't work. And there were various reasons for that. But it was a big failure because it was actually like the concept that we initially started with. And we've moved a lot away from that. So we do still have some hospitality venues, but they have to properly be offering co-working. Because what we found was, someone pays for a co-working space and then they turn up and it's not a co-working space and there's no plug and the Wi-Fi doesn't work and they just end up really annoyed. So they have to have a proper co-working area and treat it like co-working if they're going to be allowed on the platform now. But it was quite sad because, you had this hope for this kind of new way of working and we just couldn't get it to work. And I still have some hope that things will evolve and that will become more of a thing. But we do work more now with co-working spaces than we do with hospitality venues, definitely.
Excellent. And in terms of your support network, then obviously you've got your co-founder in Jules, who we've kind of talked about, having a different skill set to yourself and, using each other as a sounding board. But aside from Jules, it'd be good to know a bit more about your wider support network. So your team internally, but also about who supports you on either a strategic basis or, just an emotional support basis in terms of being a founder.
I think team's super important. You are so all in it together and it's such a journey of ups and downs and wins and losses that you get to know those people so well. And I think that also brings on to the wider support network. I would say a lot of the people I talk to when I have problems are my previous company. So the founders of my previous company are probably my first port of call if I'm not sure about something or I'm upset about something, and they've been super supportive. And sometimes you just need someone to say, man up, come on, you knew this, you know that you're making the right decision. But it is nice to have those people to call on that you trust and that they've done it before, and also people that I've worked with previously have been super supportive. And I think most people, it is interesting when you talk to your friends. There are some that are so clearly interested in what you're doing and really want to talk about it, and some that just have no interest in startups or entrepreneurial things, which is fine. But it is interesting because there are some friends where I've gone for dinner with them and they've just quizzed me on Tally, and I quite love that. But then I also love the friends where they have no interest. My husband has no interest. He does not want me to talk about Tally ever. So it is a wide range, but I think you go to different people for different things. But it's been amazing how supportive different people are.
Indeed. And I think people generally want to help, don't they, and give advice and actually support you along your journey. But actually sometimes having those friends who actually don't really care about the world of startups is quite refreshing on the same note as well. So it's good to have a mix. And you were talking there about obviously your past company. So that was a company called Florence, and I think you took them from kind of the seed stage up to Series A. So what lessons did you kind of take from that journey of scaling a business?
So I think one of the best things that Charles and Dan, who are the founders of Florence, taught me was to never be cross about mistakes. So I remember when things went wrong. So Charles's background was he was a doctor and Dan used to be in the army. And I remember going to them because I'd messed something up and them just saying, you haven't killed anyone, I don't care. What are
Yeah.
we going to do about it? But that was like really, really refreshing for me, because I used to work in audit where, you cannot get things wrong, and was so, I just found that completely like a new way of thinking. And I've really tried to bring that forward with me, because not being cross with people and blaming people, it really was like transformational for me, and it made me much more willing to take risks and try things, which is exactly what you want your staff to do in a startup. But that was probably, and whenever someone does something wrong, I always think about how nice they were to me whenever I did something wrong, and just like, don't get cross, just like try and work out what the solution is. And I found that really refreshing, and I think that's something that I've definitely taken forward.
I love that, and it's a bit of a superpower, like you say, Laura, isn't it? It's like, what would you do if you knew you couldn't fail? You could only make, still small mistake. You would only make small mistakes and learn along the way, and I think that's so
Exactly.
important. And in terms of the staff at Tally, how many staff do you employ now, and how do you try and embed that culture of making mistakes is okay as long as you're learning?
So there are 10 of us now. And I think in terms of embedding that culture, I think the super important thing is just not being cross or showing any like annoyance that that you're upset that something's gone wrong, which can be like a bit of a poker face game. So yeah, I think then it's how do we solve this problem and how do we stop it happening again, and kind of working through that routine and just making sure. I mean, we try and say to people constantly, it's all about learning. And if you're not learning something today, then, you know, you're not improving, and we're a loss making company, we need to be improving. Otherwise we'll stay a loss making company. So it's, yeah, keeping that thing. And, Rome isn't built in a day. So like we have to keep adding a brick a day, all of that kind of constant iteration and learning, and just trying to emphasize that in team meetings and in conversations, but also making sure that you celebrate all of those small wins. So we have a channel called Claps, which people don't like for various reasons. Um, but there we like celebrate, whenever anyone does anything good, we try and celebrate it. And, it's just like celebrating people on Slack. But I think people recognize that, and it pushes them to, try something new. And, even if that experiment fails, we still try and celebrate that. So
Great to know the business is scaling and you're employing 10 people already. Where do your staff work out of? And is it a kind of mixture of hybrid and working from home, or is it all office based?
it's a mixture. So we normally come in on a Monday, where we have kind of our team meetings, and see each other. And then we either come in on a Thursday or a Friday. So we normally do 2 weeks in the office. But we do encourage the team to go to lots of offices. So, they will take companies on viewings, and they will go to different offices. When a new office opens, they will go to that new office. So although it's officially 2 days in, a lot of people are doing lots of other days doing various things around the city. So yeah, 2 days officially in, but probably a lot more for certain people in the team. And I think it's really important to come together, so that we do state the days that they come in. And that's because I kind of think when people have come all the way in, we have people that don't live in London, they want to see other members of the team. And I think that's really important for kind of team spirit.
100%, Laura. And how have you funded the business to date?
So we initially got started using an Innovate UK grant. So that enabled us, when I said we built our basic website, so we developed that a bit more. And then off the back of that, we managed to raise an Innovate UK grant. And off the back of that, we managed to kind of build our basic product. And using our basic product, we raised an angel round of investment, which enabled us to, start hiring people to do actual like customer acquisition rather than just development.
Amazing. And I know the world of sort of bids and Innovate UK is a very competitive world, with success rates being anywhere from sort of 5 to 10%. So you must have put in a fantastic bid to actually win that funding in the early days.
Yeah, well, I I used to work as an accountant for Grantify, and they're a
Oh yeah.
really good company, and they helped us with that grant. So yeah.
Amazing. Shout out to Grantify then.
Yeah, so they moved a long way from the hospitality co-working spaces. That's what they originally thought, but their original proposition didn't work. But it didn't put them off. This is the key bit. They still knew they could see and look around, see what they could be on to next, rather than thinking, "Oh gosh, I came up with that idea was crap. Therefore I wasn't good enough. It wasn't good enough. It's stopping me." Instead, they were like, okay, well, where do we go to next? They still had that belief in the idea of providing these great co-working spaces. But interesting to hear.
Yeah, and I think they obviously found out quite quickly that the reasons why hospitality spaces weren't working, there's nowhere to have a quiet conversation or a very, discreet conversation sometimes, or there's not a plug socket, or, the chairs aren't comfy, or whatever it is, then, it's not really fit for purpose. And I think ultimately when you're talking about an MVP, it's got to be fit for purpose. Otherwise people aren't going to come back and use the platform. So obviously they got that feedback early on, iterated and developed the proposition from there.
But it didn't matter that you haven't thought about everything first. That's okay. They show that you can overcome that bit. If you made a mistake, actually it's not the end of it. One of the things Laura talked about was learning from previous business founders, and that they just didn't get cross when things went wrong.
Love this.
And that, isn't it just so? I mean, it is hairy. If it's all very well to say that, but if you go and lose a load of money or a massive client, these can be really significant things. But fear is paralyzing, isn't it? How you deal with stuff, and having an approach where you look for a solution instead. Right, it's good you've said we don't want to repeat that. Now how do we find the solution? That is the ideal way forward, isn't it?
Yeah, I think it's good to get it out your system as quickly as possible, Laura. Like if you have something that's disappointing news, like losing a one of your top clients, whatever it's going to be, then moan about it, get out your system, and then think of a solution. How are we going to overcome this? How can we flip this on its head and turn it into an opportunity? What is the solution? And being solutions focused, and I guess as well, just maybe not taking it so seriously. I think sometimes we can all get caught up in the day-to-day, actually taking a bit of a helicopter view and thinking, right, well, this has happened, it's not the end of the business, like we're going to move on from this, so how can we do that? And the quicker that you're able to move on, the quicker you're able to find that solution. And I think what they did really well was failing quickly and then learning from that and moving on. And I think that's the key to obviously running a successful startup, is the ability to bounce back quickly.
Yeah, it's not how many times you get knocked over, is it? It's the times you keep getting back up, or words to that effect. And it's about celebrating when things go well. It's so easy to just keep moving. There's always more work to do. There's always another deadline. There's always the constant strive for improvement, especially when you're still in a position of needing to actually make money. But to celebrate those wins together, we're all about that.
100%. I think, and Laura said they had a specific Slack channel called Claps where they would celebrate those small wins as a team. And I think particularly when, you're only going in and meeting face to face, maybe 1 or 2 days a week. Yeah. I think it's important to have that virtual conversation and actually celebrate those small wins, because, if you wait a week to talk about something, particularly when you're working in a high growth, fast paced startup, you might forget about what happened last week. So I think actually celebrating those small wins on a daily basis is a very important ritual.
Yeah, it is. Let's talk briefly about money, because this came up here, talking about Innovate UK funding, and then also angel investment. So Innovate UK, do you want to share anything more about that, Ollie? Is there some funding that people can apply for?
Yeah, so essentially it's a government-funded organisation. So they put out series of calls. These essentially are bids that people can put forward an application to, and they do them throughout the course of the year. I would recommend going on the Innovate UK website, and you can register there and then be notified of any new calls that get put out. Essentially, they're often linked to what's called the government industrial strategy. So these are key pillars, whether it's talking about an aging population or linked to sustainability. So they're things that the government sees as a big issue, essentially, and that's why they are putting out these calls to come up with new innovative ideas to help solve the problem. So founders can apply for funding in relation to these specific calls. The thing to say, though, is that they are very competitive, because obviously grant funding is free money. You don't have to pay it back. So success rates of Innovate UK calls vary from sort of 5 to 10%. So I'd recommend getting a bid writer on board and writing it in the funder's language. Obviously, they worked with a company called Grantify that helped them throughout that process. And I would say, if you are looking at grant funding, then I would definitely recommend utilising a bid writer or a specialist who knows more about it. And also making sure that it's actually a right fit for the business. Often I found people are applying for grants because it is that free money, but actually it's kind of like a square peg round hole, and actually it's taking you away from the business. And it's not really fulfilling your mission, and it's resulting in that mission drift as well. And also what I'd say is, working with a lot of founders who've accessed grant funding, is there's often quite onerous reporting targets. So actually you've got to build that into the proposition. So you might be getting, say, £50,000, but if you've got to spend a lot of time reporting back on these grants, then the paperwork is often very heavy. And actually, could you have just got 50k from your customers? So there's a bit of a trade-off there. So I think it sounds great on the face of it, but I think you've got to do your kind of in-depth due diligence in terms of putting forward for grant funding.
Briefly, you mentioned about companies who help you write these bids. Are they like no-win, no-fee solicitors? Will they only take you on if they think there's a good chance, and they only take some money if you are successful, or does it all vary?
It all varies. Some are the kind of those no-win, no-fee. Some will say, right, we want an upfront fee and then an outcome based on if you are successful, and they might take a percentage. So there's varying different models there. I think it depends on, obviously you want to check out their testimonials and who they've helped and what type of bids that they've obviously been successful with in the past. But yeah, there's a variety of different bid writers out there who can help with bid writing.
Okay, helpful to know. I'm sure something we'll return to as well. Let's do some future gazing. I mean, we're at the start of the year. We all like looking in our crystal balls, but what does Laura think the next 5 years might hold then for Tally Market?
So I think for us, it's super important to really develop our marketplace. I think in our dream world, we want to be, the go-to place when you're looking for workspace, you think Tally Market. Like when you're looking to go on holiday, you think booking.com or you think Airbnb. So I think that's basically the core of what we want to do, is to build out this marketplace. So it's got every single bit of information you could ever need on an office. And it's super easy to compare and super easy to make sure that you're making the right decision, and that it's just super, trusted. It's trusted, it's transparent. So I think for us, it's really focusing on the development of that and getting it right. And I think there's a huge amount of work that's going to go into that. So yeah, that would be kind of our dream, the go-to marketplace for workspace.
Fantastic, Laura. And I'm really keen to know, given your sort of expertise in the area, what the future of work will potentially look like 5 years from now.
It's really interesting. I think we've learned so much over the past 2 years. We've learned that working from home does work, but only for certain things, and that coming together and being in an office environment is also good for other things. And I think we'll see those two things evolve. So you kind of see it with some of these bigger companies like Google Campus, where you have this huge thing with all of these different areas for different types of work. And I think that will evolve. So, if you are a company, you can book exactly the type of workspace that you want for that particular thing that you're doing, and that will become much easier. Whereas I think at the moment, it still feels a bit like you have to have an office that does everything. Whereas I think what we're seeing increasingly is companies get downsized offices, and then they use these additional kind of add on demand spaces to match the different requirements of what they're actually doing. So that could be like the company all hands. We book somewhere really cool for that rather than having it in the office. If that makes sense.
So, Laura, one of the key parts of the Founded and Grounded show is asking our wonderful featured founders if they had to distill down just one piece of advice that they'd pass on to somebody thinking of starting a business or running a startup, what would that be?
I think it's what we discussed earlier, which is think of the simplest way you can test something and do it that way. I think we've really benefited from Jules is very good at thinking high level. And when you can get that level of simplicity quickly and just test something, I think that's super important, and you'll learn way more than if you spend hours building something. So yeah, simplest way to test something and then test it.
So, Laura, I know you had a question to ask our listeners. So what was that question?
If you had the choice, how many days per week would you go into the office? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5?
Or 0 as well, I guess.
Or 0, yeah, completely remote.
Excellent. Well, or 7, yeah, that's true. Yeah, lots of founders listening probably will be more than 5, definitely. So we'll get some results to you on that question. And if people want to find out a bit more about Tally Market and maybe book some workspace or a meeting for one of their team days, how can they find out a bit more about where to find you?
So our website is tallymarket.co.uk. But we're also offering Founded and Grounded listeners 20 free tokens. So that's equivalent to 5-day passes when they register and buy 100 tokens. You can find that on tallymarket.co.uk/F&G.
Amazing, Laura, and what a fantastic offer for people listening. And how can people find you across socials?
So you can find us on LinkedIn, Instagram, just by searching Tally Market.
So, Laura, a massive thank you for your time and insights this morning. Thank you very much for taking time out your day.
Thanks so much, and so nice to be here.
Okay, Ollie, so we've covered various different things in this little chunk of your conversation there. The evolution of workspaces and what we want. Okay, so what are your ideals then? Because you're someone who goes and works you've got an interesting sort of hybrid way of working. What do you look for in places that you're going to out of interest?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think obviously location is important. You don't want to be travelling too far, first of all. Well, I don't anyway. I think that you want the ability to have private conversations. So things like phone booths are great for that. I think having interesting people around is quite key as well. So you kind of get inspired, maybe do some networking, potentially develop new business relationships. So I think the community aspect is really important. And then,
nice
basic things like that, Laura, exactly. Having nice coffee, having, space that you can use the fridge, having nice toilets and showers, the basics. If you're talking about maybe Maslow's hierarchy of needs, it's having those basic things at the bottom, but also, as I say, having those inspiring people around you that you can bounce ideas off and be inspired by, I think is also equally important.
Yeah, I love all those kitchen conversations with the random people who you're not working with at all, but you just can jump straight in and just permission to just start asking people about what they do. At one conversation I met a guy who works for a company installing solar panels, and they installed these massive solar panels out the back of my house. I had no idea. They have a company that's up and down the country, and I imagine the solar panel farm as a bit like a lake rather than solar panels, because that sort of looks more appealing in my mind. But I discovered he's one of the people behind it. And then another man whose job it is to make roads much safer. So he was trying to come up with some sort of blue sky thinking and struggling sitting at his desk. So he came to get a coffee, and it's like, let me tell you about the things that I like seeing on roads. I like seeing wildflower verges and, pencils outside of schools, giant pencils as bollards.
Love those.
These are all things. So, I'm sure he got more than he bargained for when he went to go make his cup of tea. But this is actually, I love doing that. And when I when I'm in an area where I'm surrounded by people who are in the area that I do my radio show, then I'll be signing them up to come on the radio. It's I love it. Any excuse just to have a bit of a natter. But that bit is probably desks are desks. I would expect them to have good internet and to be cozy and all that. But that bit is something I really like. Yeah, interesting people, the community side.
Indeed, and it's like where innovation and diversity really thrives, isn't it?
Yeah.
Like he wouldn't have had your insights or perspective on things, and that's when you bounce ideas off each other and actually come up with a better proposition overall, because you're getting insights and thoughts from lots of different types of people.
Sorry, I was just about to say, I've also remembered that one of the first people that I saw in this shared working space was someone who I volunteered to be an actor in one of their short films like 23 years ago. Maybe more than that, actually, maybe more like 25 years ago. And I'd not seen them since. And they are successfully making films, which is great. I am not an actress, but that was kind of funny and embarrassing. I didn't think he'd changed a bit. But anyway, these are the joys. This is why it's good.
You never know who you're going to bump into, do you? That's the thing.
No. And how many days in would you want to be in an office? And I know you're sort of trying to move house and stuff, so you might have things in boxes, but how many days do you like to go in somewhere?
I normally try and do 2 days in a co-working space and sort of 3 days. Well, I didn't say 3 days. 2 days from home, 2 days in co-working, and I spend a day with my kids. So that's kind of me. But I think it's really interesting, isn't it, Laura, about where you work from to the best of your ability. I definitely like a mix, and I think actually working from different spaces gives you a different perspective, a different outlook. I think there's a great importance on just changing your environment and changing your way of thinking. So I think, co-working spaces are a great way of doing that, because you can have that variety and flexibility.
Yeah. Well, we would very much like to hear your thoughts on this, as Laura would. So do get on social media and share your comments about the future of working and where you want to be doing it and for how many days a week. We'd love to hear from you on that. On that subject of social, actually, should we go to our community lead? Should we hear from Samantha and find out some of the things that you've been saying in response to our previous episode, where our featured entrepreneur also asked a question? So, Sam, tell us what the conversation has been about.
Before the festive break, we spoke to Edmund Wood of Belgrove Rum to hear his story of how he quit his job to follow his dream of setting up his own business. Edmund's question for you all was, what is or was your biggest fear before starting your own business? I thought this was a fantastic question, and one that really resonates with any entrepreneur or aspiring entrepreneur, but especially poignant as we come into the new year, with many people thinking about what they want, the changes to be made, and taking those leaps into following their own dreams this new year. So the options given were fear of failure, scared you won't like it, financial insecurity, or other. Unsurprisingly, the biggest voted answer was financial uncertainty, with a whopping 76% of the votes. Following that was a fear of failure with 19%, and then other with 5%. Interestingly, no one was worried that they wouldn't like it, which shows that for so many people out there, it's these other fears, both of which tie to that fear of failure, which is holding people back from taking that step to start their own business. I absolutely loved Vic's answers in the chat as well. She shared that fear of failure and financial uncertainty were more or less tied for her, but she failed and failed until something stuck. Just how wonderful is that? It's truly about failing and learning from those mistakes in business. The fear of the unknown also got shared in the comments, but there were so many inspiring comments shared as well. So Claire never chose to start a business, it just happened, so there was no fear for her. But Gary said there's always an element of doubt and we mustn't give up, which is just so inspiring as we start this new year and reset our mindsets. And John reminded us that starting a business is scary, but it's scary and exciting in equal measures. Brad shared that the payoff can always be worth the risk, and Elliot also reminded us that great things come from taking a risk. So while there will always be doubt and fear, whether the result is failure or success, if we've learned one thing from our guests and from our listeners over the course of Founded and Grounded so far, I reckon it's that good things come from taking those steps, from learning through mistakes and finding that true passion and following it. So absolutely fantastic question. And the answers and the conversation around this were so interesting, so inspiring, and just giving that sense of community, bringing us all together and knowing that we're not alone. So if you want to join in the conversation, come and find us on social media. Come join the conversation, whether it's our new question from this episode, or if you've got something to say about Edmund's question, we'd still love to hear from you. Come and join the conversation.
Once again, big thank you to Laura from Tally Market. Don't forget the offer that they have. If you're a Founded and Grounded listener and you go to tallymarket.co.uk, you'll be able to get your 20 free tokens. So your 5-day passes when you buy 100 tokens. So do take a little look at that. Good to see you, Ollie, and thank you so much for listening.